Hello friends, welcome to episode 70 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I am Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
I don't think we're doing too bad tonight.
No, I think we're doing alright tonight.
A little tired from the work week, but still invigorated for the show. So,
yeah, right on.
So we'll go with that.
Right on. It's been an interesting week for me, from a role-playing standpoint. Sean and I have gotten into a lot of space properties recently. We were watching The Expanse on Amazon Prime. Also, Eve Echoes, the mobile version of Eve Online has gone live, and we started playing that. So we started looking into Traveler.
Oh, God.
As a game system, like the old 1974 spacefaring game.
Yeah, I'm willing to bet right now if Mad Elf is not listening right now and he's listening to the recording, his ears just instantaneously perked.
Instantaneously perked up. He did the cat eyes thing where his pupils become the size of his entire eyes.
Yep. I'm sure Overwatch is doing it as well.
Probably,
I could see that.
Probably a little bit, yeah. We watched some videos on it, trying to kind of learn the system and what it's become. It's in its second edition right now.
Mm-hmm. Surprising, honestly.
Yeah, so it's still kind of kicking, but I'll tell you, it's dense.
Yeah,
it's
well,
dense.
I mean, look at the time period.
It's a very detailed game. Yeah, it reminded me a lot of Palladium, from the standpoint of just how many layers of detail. When we started watching this video about how you can refinance your ship.
Oh, yeah.
And how you can defer your loan if you roll high enough on your finance. It's oh, God, this is stuff that I try to avoid in real life.
I'm feeling this.
I'm playing this game to escape this sort of stuff. I don't want to have to deal with this, so...
So hi to everybody out in live chat land. If you are not currently on our live chat, you can join it if you are part of our Patreon, which you can get at patreon.com/storytellerconclave. If you are listening to us live on Mixlr, thank you so much. And please always join our Discord. We'd love to have you there as well. Today's pre-music actually was brought to us by Weston, who does the Arcane Anthems at Patreon. He makes free music for games and podcasts. I am a member of his Patreon, so give him a listen. He's got some pretty fantastic music, and I think you're going to hear more of it as we keep doing these intros. And if you like them, or you want to hear something else, or you've got some ideas, send them our way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today.
All right. So here's how this topic came about today.
Okay.
Sean and I are sitting around talking about various game systems and stuff like that, like you do.
Yeah.
And a while back, Sean had tried to adapt his favorite literary property, Wheel of Time, to role playing. And no, there have been a couple of, I think, attempts at that. I think there was back in the day when the 3.5 open gaming license stuff, where you saw that big flood of third-party D&D books, that were all for weird other systems, came out. There was a Wheel of Time game that came out there. But ultimately though, there really hasn't ever been an official Wheel of Time property. And there's a lot of unique mechanics in that story world, as there are with a lot of different fantasy stories and such like that.
Right.
And so finding the right role-playing system to represent the actual the feel of it. You can't just have magic, because the one power does not quite work like magic. It's very free-form. Mm-hmm. It's weaving together different elements to have different effects and such like that.
Well, there's a certain sense of style to it that is very different.
Exactly. And so we got into a discussion as he was searching for some Dungeons & Dragons resources to adapt into Wheel of Time as a setting. And I said to him, are you sure you want to use D&D?
Right.
I know it's the default, and I know it's what we're all kind of most comfortable with here. D&D is almost ubiquitous or synonymous with role-playing in general. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think that's the best fit for Wheel of Time. And we got into a bit of a further discussion about that. And that's kind of what sparked this topic tonight is, how do you go about taking that book or that movie or that story or whatever that you love that is not a role-playing game, and turn it into a role-playing game.
Yes, and as you were even describing things to me, and we were talking even during dinner, because we always do, some other things came through that, and hopefully we can get some of those, because it's not straight up pros and cons of doing this. There's little variants all through the process, and changes on both not only the setting style and what IP you may be grabbing it from and how you're applying that to just what, whether it's tactical or whatever, but also how you're applying that IP, because it can be very different. People have a lot of ideas out there, and we are not saying it's a 1-to-1. It never is.
Yeah. Like, I want to make this abundantly clear from the beginning of this discussion. This is more of us kind of exploring the topic by walking around it and describing what we see.
Correct.
And less and a lot less of a here's how you do it.
Right. And some things we've seen, some things we've heard.
Sure.
I mean, I will flat out say I am with the master DM, and I'm losing his name off the top of my head, and I feel horrible about this. He's got a wonderful YouTube channel, and numerous books. But he Guy is his first name. Scolari? I can never say his last name off the top of my head, and I'm terrible with names, so I do apologize. But he is like me in the sense that, or I'm like him, in the sense that I can't take an existing book property like Forgotten Realms or Eberron or any of those that have a hard world where things are very set and things are very configured, and use it directly. I have a hard time with that. I take a much softer approach when it comes to things. So when you bring something like Elder Scrolls to the table,
right.
I look at that and I go, God, there's a lot of, what kind of setting rules are there? And I think that's one of the things you have to think about when you're bringing an IP in, like whether it's Elder Scrolls, whether it's Lord of the Rings, or we step into sci-fi. The Matrix would be another IP that you could bring.
Like
in.
I was talking about, one of our favorite video games, The Division.
The Division's another one. I'm trying to think of some more publicly recognized things.
Sure.
I mean, The Division is Tom Clancy, but Tom Clancy's got a lot of story. There's
a lot of stuff.
So if we, I don't want to go as far as to say like Harry Potter or anything like that, even though it's because there's so much detail in that, but people have opinions when you say something like The Wizard of Oz. You have a very hard world setting. Everyone knows the main players. Everybody knows all the parts of the world. Everybody knows where people are in that world and what's going on. Alice in Wonderland is another one. Like, they've developed that IP to a point where pretty much you have to kind of figure out where you fit to be able to work in those worlds. And I think in those senses, you run a lot of risks with using those hard-defined IPs.
Yeah.
Because they're expecting things out of them.
Exactly.
You have an audience expectation.
Yeah. And I mean, these stories and movies and such like that are written in such a way that there are already a lot of moving pieces by necessity.
And as a point, just before we get too far here, Overwatch did bring up that Wizards did attempt to do Wheel of Time, and they failed at it.
Oh yeah, that's what I said. There was a third edition book for it.
Right, and it sucked.
Yeah, and it sucked.
Not to say that third edition didn't suck on its own, but we won't go there.
Well, I mean, third edition was when you hold it up to its predecessor, second edition, though.
Wait a second, are we running the same gambit as Star Trek, the movies, where like so many editions fail? Do you remember? Like everybody's just like every third movie or every other movie sucks in Star Trek. I don't know.
I think it was the odd number movies sucked.
Yeah,
the even number movies were awesome.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe we're doing that with D&D, and I just didn't realize it.
I don't think so, because I think it's
fifth is good.
It's hard to say that second was a failure.
Thaco.
Okay, look, I think it was a failure, but it was also the most prolific tabletop role-playing game probably in history.
Yeah. I mean, it was prolific. I'll give you that. The covers, 100%. There's no doubt about it. It made D&D what D&D is.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it didn't suck in its own way.
Look, I need you to understand I'm on your side, but we're getting away from the topic.
We are. Let's get back to topic. This is why we have a podcast.
Because we have a microphone and you don't.
That's correct. This is what you pay for, guys. This is what
exactly.
You pay for.
This is the quality content you signed up for.
That's right.
But what I'm saying though is that these movies and books and such like that, they have a lot of moving pieces already by necessity because they are not open world role playing games. They are stories. They are designed to have characters that go through journeys, that have story arcs, that have growth and do things, and then the story ends. And so anytime you try to adapt an existing IP into a role-playing game, you almost by necessity have to bring with it all of those characters, all those events, all those places, all those important things, those landmarks and events that happen along the way. But unfortunately, some of those things can really get in the way of your setting. Take Lord of the Rings, for instance. If you're going to set something in Lord of the Rings, understandably, you're going to kind of want to know what's going on with, Aragorn and the Hobbits and Isengard and all that sort of stuff. And it's difficult to then tell a story in the Lord of the Rings universe during any period of time that involves the whole, the series, the events of the series, that's not going to then involve those main characters and those events.
100% agree with you. I 100% agree with you. I listen to people who talk about doing Lord of the Ring games and use the Lord of the Ring properties. Even like it was a Warhammer who did it, Games Workshop.
Yeah.
And I look at that and I go, you're setting up a determination of what people understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a tactical recreation like Warhammer, Games Workshop, it works because, again, we're talking about a tactical simulator that's simulating battles.
Mm-hmm.
So you're re-simulating Helm's Deep. You're re-simulating other things like that. They used to do that for Civil War reenactments and things like that, where they were doing tabletop battle. So that makes sense for this. But the moment that you take a character like, Aragorn or Legolas or any of that and put it into a role-playing aspect, everybody has an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
Because they know what they believe it. One of the... I'm going to say it, and it's going to echo, and everybody is going to listen to this. Everyone has a way of how they believe Drizzt Do'Urden is. And the moment that your DM does not say it the way your brain hears it, and doesn't make them react the way you expect them to react, your reality is shattered. Your image of reality is shattered.
Yeah, and then you have false expectations that aren't being met,
Correct.
And that always leads to hurt feelings.
Correct. And I think that's the hardest part about grabbing a hard IP and bringing it in. Now, It's funny. I just had a conversation with a novelist who has a world that he's serialized, and he wants to do a LARP with it. And my first thing that I told him, and it was just right off the top of my head, was do not do an existing part of your IP.
Oh, yeah.
Pull elements. That's really where you can shine in doing this. So if you're thinking about doing a world of Harry Potter or of Lord of the Rings or of The Matrix or of John Wick or of any of these types of things, grab the edge. Go to the fringe. Just the feeling of it.
Yeah.
You can have letters or notes or points of reference that come in from the legitimate story that drives your part of it, but it is not directly attached to canon.
Yes.
Canon can run in the background. It can exist and continue moving. But the moment that you're not directly involved with that story, don't go to Ankh-Morpork. If you're going to be doing Discworld, just don't do that. That's terrible. You can have death involved, like on a hilltop looking over you, but don't bring him into your story because that's just going to cause a problem.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of the same thing that I did with my Elder Scrolls game.
Right.
I found a spot in Elder Scrolls history that exists between Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall and Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, where nothing was going on. The Empire was at relative peace, and then I set it in a place that was neither High Rock nor Morrowind.
Nope.
So not even the repercussions or the preludes to those plots would even come in. Now, if you guys end up there, yeah, sure, maybe you'll see what's going on. But, you're not getting involved.
No.
You're not going to meet the Nerevarine from Morrowind.
It's over there.
It's over there, and there's other stuff going on. quote unquote.
Yeah.
So
I would say if you're taking a story, let's start by saying we're gonna lay down that first ground rule of just don't grab canon.
Yeah.
Don't grab canonic stuff. You're just gonna run into problems. Stay one step away from it, and have your players understand what aspects you're grabbing.
Well, aside from that, though, like, if you grab canon, you run the very serious risk of making your own PCs, like, background characters to the canon PCs.
Correct.
Like, because all of a sudden it becomes their story. Like, if
Yeah.
Aragorn shows up in your story, what are you doing?
Yeah.
In what way are you going to compare to what Aragorn's doing right now?
Yeah.
You know?
Secondly, why isn't he doing something else?
Right. Why is he messing around with your low-level ass, you know?
Exactly. So let's start there. But when you're going into an adaptation, it doesn't mean that you're following the existing rules. For instance, when we were sitting down at dinner, I was kind of saying that, we were going back and forth about, I think it was...
Which comes first, the IP or the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were saying...
I was saying the IP should come first.
Right.
Because the IP should dictate the... You should try to distill the essence of... I know there's big words there.
No,
distill
you're doing fine.
the essence of what the IP is.
For example?
Instance, Wheel of Time is a very, I would say, interpersonal story.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of political maneuvers and such like that. I mean, there's some combat, definitely some combat, and the one power is definitely a very fantastical thing, but it's also not a very hard-coded thing.
Right.
So, like, something with a rigid magic system wouldn't fit the one power.
Right.
Something that enhances gameplay elements of social and political combat would be good for Wheel of Time. And likewise, there's also something about... there's swordmasters are a thing. In this setting, and so the sort of samurai-esque sword styles that they use are arguably important to include in the story, but, maybe that might need some adaptation. So you kind of want to look at how deep you want to go into the combat, how much you want to spend time on the political and social stuff,
Right.
and find a game system that enhances those aspects of the story. It's not a real day-to-day adventuring... Dungeons and Dragons style story.
Right.
With, like, random encounters on the road and constant combat encounters against weird fantastical monsters. I mean, yeah, they fight Trollocs and faceless ones or, whatever the eyeless, and things like that. What do they call them? Mordrolls? Anyways, but those aren't really, I don't think, the focus.
Right.
Like, typically those are horror encounters until about halfway through the story.
Right.
Where it's like, oh crap, run, here they are.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really see them capable of dealing with things until finally they've gained enough experience to finally fight back.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really a D&D story. D&D I don't think would be the best place to put Wheel of Time.
Because it's not as tactical.
Right. And so what you want to do is you want to look at what the essence of the IP is, what sort of things this IP focuses on, and then try to find a game system that already exists that offers you those aspects.
See, whereas I was kind of taking it as if I was doing something like The Matrix as a game, right? I could do that in any number of settings. But what if my direction that I'm taking is that all of my players are programs and they don't know they're in the Matrix and they're investigating breaches. They just don't know they're doing that. At that point, I'm doing a mystery and an intrigue game. I could do that with Fate.
Sure.
I could do that with Apocalypse World.
Sure.
I could do that with any of those more narrative focuses. I don't need to do tactical. They might have an agent come at them, but that's a huge threat to them.
Oh, it is, yeah.
And like that is going to have a different weight on the story, and it's going to sit in a much more communicating, skill-based, discovery, dissemination kind of feel. And I mean, who knows? What if I decide to do it in an early version of the Matrix? Maybe it's like the 20s in Matrix world, right? And Neo isn't the Neo character, the chosen one who's going to come through and reset everything, is there. He just doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
Yeah.
So now we got phones are these archaic, kind of rotary crazy phones that don't own. There's switchboard operators that are legitimate things. All of that is totally different, but the setting in the world of the Matrix is still the same. All the rules still apply.
Sure.
But I'm doing this mystery, almost Dick Tracy-esque.
So instead of looking at the feel of the Matrix IP, which
Right.
is a high combat philosophy lesson,
I would say that. That's not a bad way to go.
but instead of looking at that, you then look at what's around the periphery of it.
Correct.
What other stories could we tell here with a different feel, a different style?
Yeah.
Explore.
And I could legitimately use like City of Mist.
Yeah.
100%.
City of Mist would be great for it.
Exactly. I'd make a few changes, but we'll talk about
Weird
how those would go.
programs doing things like that could very well be rifts for mythical creatures.
Right. And the more you lean into it, the more you become...
The more you start breaking reality.
Correct.
Yeah.
The more you push out of it. And I think that would work out perfectly.
You and I got talking about, again, getting back to The Division earlier. A video game that's set in Tom Clancy's, looter shooter, run and gun, cover based,
A short 5,000-foot overview, modern day, pandemic occurs, the president activates a certain order which basically turns normal citizens, and I say normal citizens in the sense that they have training.
Domestic sleeper cells
Yeah.
of secret agents, essentially, that are supposed to
Help.
When the government crumbles, they are the ones that's supposed to rise up and help
Pick
get
up the
society back
ashes and
together.
put society back together and keep everything rolling.
Right, so we're talking a post-apocalyptic American setting after a biological weapon attack.
Yeah, so not super post, but pretty darn close to post. Like right after.
Near future
Near
is
future.
what we call it.
Yeah.
So, we got talking about that. And so, I was looking at it from the standpoint of how do I replicate the feel of the game, but, pull it into a setting where we could explore the daily lives of these agents.
Right.
And such like that. But still kind of have that tactical, gun-focused battle sort of feel to it. And I landed on Savage Worlds from that.
Right, but
You,
you're
on
also,
the other hand-
you were thinking of the traditional big city, which is what they have.
Sure.
Like you're either in DC or New York, you're in the heart of it. There are guns, there are grime, there are crime, there's all kinds of stuff that you have to work on, and every day is literally a running firefight block by block.
Right.
Whereas, we were sitting there and Vicky was there, and she said, the whole idea was, well, what about, Butt Kiss, Iowa? Where population of 2,500.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a agent there, but there's still stuff happening. There's still a world.
You're not going to have roving violent gangs and, building fires and stuff.
But you might have, Jim Bob and his brothers who are like, we're going to put America back together our way.
Uh-huh.
Meanwhile, you might have a religious faction who's just trying to do the right thing. And then you might have some crazies who are like, just burn the earth. Let's just raise the entire town and restart over again, or not at all.
And the other one that you brought up, which I thought was a great example, and this is the example of going with the game system first, and to get a particular game feel out of it, to explore a different aspect that isn't directly in the IP.
Right.
Was what's going on in the White House in the days when the green poison is unfolding.
Yeah. You're basically playing West Wing.
What if you wanted to play it as a political drama?
Yeah.
As the green poison was, was happening, and America was falling apart around your ears.
Yeah, I'm a presidential aide. You're a senator.
Yeah, exactly. So how would you do that? If you could find a highly political game and then just set it in the Division's world.
I mean, I'm not going to say Amber's going to work. We're just not going to say that.
Paranoia? I still don't know how Amber works. So.
We just got to bring Overwatch back on and pray
no
that he
rules,
remembers.
no gods, no masters.
That's
It's
right.
just chaos
That's right.
and anarchy.
That's pretty much the case. But anywho, so I guess what we're saying is that there's not necessarily a right way to start into it. It's a matter of thinking about your IP and thinking about the theme and direction, whether it's mystery, whether it's tactical, whether it's gritty, whether it's going to be, scary. Is it a fear-based game?
Yeah.
Which it very much could be. I mean, I assure you could make Division into a fear game.
Oh, I absolutely could.
Play it just with a Jenga tower, and that would be terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
But you have to know those two pieces to be able to step into it. I think some of the places where you can run aground is where you have an IP that everybody knows the details of. And that's where it's like there's an expectation that's set forth, there's assumptions that are set forth in a hard way, so that your players suddenly lose their mind's eye because they're like, wait, it doesn't work that way. Like, what do you mean? That's not accurate. You lose them in a step, and that's where you start misstepping things.
I think if you're gonna do this, I think there's, and I think I'm pretty sure I did this with my Elder Scrolls game. Though I'm not sure I needed to, because I arguably, other than Sean, I'm the biggest Elder Scrolls fanatic at the table. Well, no, actually that's false, because the Mad Elf is
pretty serious.
Is a pretty serious Elder Scrolls
pretty
fan
serious
too.
Elder
So
Scrolls fan.
He's definitely along with me every step of the way. But I don't think I had to issue that big of a disclaimer that this was my own imagining of the Elder Scrolls world, but I think it's valuable to do if you are going to adapt an IP and people do know it beforehand, is to just reassure everybody, like, look, I understand some things may seem a little alien to you, but those are because, like, for instance, with my Elder Scrolls game, I mean, there's a lot of things, it's adapted off of a video game. Okay.
Yeah.
There are things that are made canon in that video game series simply because it's a video game. They have to have game mechanics. They can only spend so much time programming NPC interactions or different variations of monsters and things like that, where in a tabletop game you're not saddled with that limitation. You can really go anywhere that your mind's eye takes you. You can adapt anything you can pull out of the monster manual and call it a Daedra. So understandably there were going to be some points where people were going to look at what is canon in the video games and say, oh, that's not how that works. Well, of course it's not how it works. I don't want it to work like the video game. I want it to work like my tabletop world. The whole reason we're playing it as a tabletop game right now is so we can break out of the IP's limitations.
Yes.
And explore them. So, buckle up, Buttercup, because if a little inconsistency here on how a flame atronach looks is going to break your immersion, I need you to deal, with a whole lot more coming up.
How does that go? I'm going to need you to get all the way off my back.
All the way off my back. Wow, let me get off that thing then.
That's
all right.
But at the same time, if you can find IPs that you want to go with that are not as stringent, that maybe have some variation in them, that have a little bit of drift. I think John Wick is actually a really good, I would say, light IP. Now, there's some argument there, because now that we've had up to Parabellum in the storyline, people have a kind of understanding of how the Assassin's secret society works, how many there are, how well connected they are, what kind of, elements there are around the world, and where the values come in and go out. But at the same time, like, you could do anything in that. You could be an outsider who gets brought in. You could be an assassin, much like John Wick, who's made their way out of it.
Yeah.
You could be someone who's been on the no list, basically, on the kill list, but silent.
Could be some average Joe who is at the wrong place at the wrong time and gets swept up into the whole world.
Exactly.
Yep.
Or basically makes a kill. And now they have a chit, like another assassin looks at them and says, "Oh, that kill was yours totally. So let's go get that taken care of."
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Congratulations. Here's your first coin.
Here's your $2.6 million that you just earned off that hit. What?
I did what?
And you're a freaking paperboy.
Yeah.
And that's a whole story within itself of just how do you handle that?
Yeah.
And you could take that as far as tactical. You could take that in a mystery sense. You could take that in a very social sense, but it is flexible. So,
I want to actually kind of diverge from the discussion right now. There's something really interesting happening in the live show chat right now. So Knox in the Box says, "There's no right way, only wrong ways. Doesn't this whole adaptation concept just invite metagaming to begin with?" But then, well. But then Heatsink actually makes a really great point. He says, perhaps, but that's not a bad thing. Your player knowing the setting makes it easier to play in that setting.
I agree. I think there's a gray area between knowing the setting and knowing all the details of the setting.
Exactly. Because the thing is this kind of ties back into the whole idea of, like, avoiding canon.
Well, not just avoiding canon. I mean, we talked about it in our last show. When someone knows more about technology than you do and you start using incorrect terms, suddenly you run a risk. I think the same thing applies here. Like, it's hard for me to run a game in Forgotten Realms with friends who know more about it than me. Because suddenly I'm having to do a ton of research to keep up with them.
Yes.
It is much easier for me to create whole cloth canon, give them base information, and then go from there. Again, how much do you give them? But if I've got an IP that kind of just skirts the edge of things, gives me a background, much like when I will say this, much like in our previous games, like in the 90s and such, when you'd go into a new RPG and you'd see the mountains in the background, or like the sky having two moons, you could never get to those. Those were literally background, but it gave you a sense of scope. That is effectively what you want your IP to do for you.
Yeah.
You want it to give you a sense of scope, a little bit of boundary, a little bit of framework to give it flavor, to give it the outside edge flavor, and then you're inside that world now doing something different.
And keeping in mind, too, that knowing the details of a world does not mean you get to interact with those details either.
Right.
So knowing who Elminster is does not mean you can just go knock on Elminster's door and just be like, well, excuse me, sir.
Right.
I happen to know you're an all-powerful arc wizard. Can you do this?
Right.
Or that for me?
Yeah.
Sure. He's going to be like, well, who the hell are you? Get off my front porch.
Well, it's like
I'm
using
busy.
the Star Trek world. Like, you can be in Star Trek
Son
and
of a
know
bitch,
what's...
I'm trying to watch The Lost Boys.
Nice. Just a bit too much garlic. But, like, Star Trek is a good example of an IP that's open. Yes, there's a lot of framework there that you can work within, but you're not going to have Picard or, Kirk
or Cisco
or Spock or something. You know what's happened in sections of the galaxy. You know about the Gamma Quadrant and the Alpha System, and things like that, and you can still have an entire story that has nothing to do with those people, that still works within the framework and is still flexible enough to have changes occur. A new system for the engine, that's not necessarily just warp technology, could be something new. And people are like, oh, okay, well, that's totally different. Nobody really knows what the deflector shield totally does, and that gives you flexibility there as well.
It's a MacGuffin.
That's right. So you have flexibility in stories like that. And I think any story can have that flexibility as long as your players are willing to take it. Even IPs like The Witcher is one where there's a whole world there that you can do both post and pre to the Witcher stories that we know.
Yeah.
But there are not hundreds, but there's tons of books. There's a bunch of games that people, this is canon. Skirt the edge of canon. That's all you have to do.
Yep.
And make sure your players are flexible. Did we beat that to death, and do we have some questions that we have to get through?
Okay, so here's the thing about us and questions this week.
There's a lot.
We got some great questions this week.
We did.
Literally, when we were putting the show sheet together, I actually got slammed with a lot of work today, so I didn't get to work on the show sheet as much as I wanted to.
It's okay. It's a good discussion.
But I did say, I'm like, oh, thank goodness we got so many great questions, because we can literally dedicate like half of our show to that, and I think we should. So you wanna pick the first one here?
Yeah. So let's just hit the, you know what? I want to do Hulu.
All right.
As a GM learning a new system, I can get overwhelmed by all the details and the burden that when at the table, I'm supposed to be the expert on the rules.
Right.
We just talked about this.
Yep.
This is especially true for me if I'm learning a new system that is not like systems I know, i.e. heavy rolling, or roll heavy to story heavy, fantasy based to superhero based. What are some tips I can use to reduce the cognitive wear of learning new systems? That is a hard question to answer, but I will say this. For me, I usually find an expert. I don't step into systems that I don't know without consulting my friends, without consulting colleagues, without watching YouTube videos and seeing what not only like a storyteller talks about it, but also maybe a little bit of gameplay. I'll then go and find whatever screen they've produced, DM screen, or quick sheet.
That'll instantly tell you what rules they think you should know at a moment's notice. Yep. I'm definitely going to back you up on the watch a bunch of YouTube. There are actual play YouTube videos of damn near everything out there. We got interested in Traveler. We had a bunch of people making tutorial videos on explaining Traveler to us. We got interested in Legend of the Five Rings. We had an actual play, like in one Google search, we had an actual play of Legend of the Five Rings.
That's fantastic.
Most current edition.
Yeah.
Same thing with Savage Worlds. We started looking into that. Bam. Instant videos. So I think probably the biggest thing for me is like it's one thing to read the rules. It's another to see it played and see how those rules are put into action. So I think watching an actual play of the game that you're trying to learn is very good. The other big tip I'm going to say is just be open and honest with your players. You know, look, I'm learning this system right along with you guys. There's going to be some stumbles along the way, but I think it's important that we make a table ruling. If we can't come to an amicable agreement on what the table ruling should be, maybe we just have a roll-off just to keep the game moving, and then we'll look it up later.
Yeah, don't stop.
Every stumble with the rules then becomes a learning thing later. You just make a note of it. Like, we didn't know how grapple checks worked.
Yes.
Okay? I'm just going to call it an opposed strength check at the table. I don't know if that's really how it works, but we're going to do that. You roll strength, you roll strength, bam, okay. Now we're just going to adjudicate the scene, and it's just going to go from there.
Keep moving.
But you look at that note a little bit later, and then between game sessions you say, shit, I didn't know how grapple checks worked. Let's look that up. Let's really... Oh, it's an athletics or acrobatics check. I get it now. That makes sense. And I'll know that for next time.
And be flexible with your players. If they created a character that they intended to go one direction and the rules basically really needed it to be a different way, allow them to make that change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be flexible, especially early on. That's another thing. Anytime you get a new system, be flexible with your players. Let them make changes to their characters to meet the character needs that they're seeing. Don't just make them stay along that trail.
A lot of you guys were new to 5th edition when I started my Elder Scrolls game.
We were.
And I let you guys go on basically 2 whole adventures. And then at the end of those adventures was like, okay, you're back at home now. You're back in the city. You have the opportunity now to either set your character in stone or respec them.
Yep.
And we will write that however you need it to be. If you want it to be a different person, or if you just want your cleric to be a warlock now.
Yep.
We can do that. I'll retcon anything you need. But let's make some decisions now that you've had some experience playing.
Yep.
Okay.
I hope that helped, Hulavu.
Yeah. And that's a great question because it's a very common concern for everyone. And hell, I mean, you and I still have that concern when we're dipping into new things. You know?
Always.
So yeah. All right, so Samantha, one of our Patreons, asks, any tips on adjusting stats / finding corresponding spells and weapons for characters from video games, movies, books, etc.? What's a good strategy?
So this kind of goes back to your finding the right type of system that works for that.
Yes.
And I think you kind of have to start with knowing a couple systems, and if you don't know systems well enough, again, ask. We've got a great group here, so if you're interested in doing something unique, throw it in the channel. People will give you a bunch of different systems.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think the first step that you have to know is, are you doing something tactical? Are you doing something emotional that's going to be a lot of social stuff and commentary?
What level of detail do you think you require? Is it a very technical sort of setting that you're trying to get into, or is it more of a loosey-goosey setting?
And if you're not comfortable with stats and spells and weapons and things like that, maybe roll the whole system back to something lighter that can still be functional for you. I mean, there's nothing that says that you can't go back to a system that's not unlike, City of Mist, where basically the people are coming up with terms for what they're doing versus the actual weapon and stats and specifics. You can come back.
I would dare say fall back to something that's setting agnostic, like Fate or
Fate
GURPS.
is a good one. GURPS is good.
Savage Worlds is setting agnostic. Some great suggestions for systems like that, where if you don't have a specific system in mind, you can fall back on these setting agnostic ones because they are specifically written to be very adaptable. I was telling Rob earlier, Savage Worlds, they have a whole spell system. And I know Draven was also describing this in our on our Discord. And he was saying that the spells are very generic. It's literally, and Rob said fire, and I said no, already too specific. It is blast. in which you project a projectile towards your enemy with the intent of doing harm. Now, is that a blast of eldritch energy? Is it flame from your eyes or from your fingertips or something like that? Is it a piece of technology that fires a projectile or something like that for you? Maybe. I don't know. What's your setting? But it's so generic that you can flavor it any way you want. But the end result is the same. A projectile hits your enemy and does damage.
Yeah, and listening to that makes it easy, because at that point it could be anything.
Yeah.
And magic equals technology just as easily.
And there's even rules in there for, okay, you want it to be technology now, so it is an item? Okay, sure, you want that Division 2 sniper turret?
Yep.
Cool. It's a blast spell, but there are rules for how I can invest power points into it, aka a battery, and hand it to Rob's character, who does not typically wield these things.
Yep. So the first strategy I'm going to say is the same thing that both Sarah and I do. Find some experts. Ask for assistance. Always communicate with a group. I mean, anytime that you can move to a society or group like us, and there's plenty out there. Reddit's got a great community for it. Throw a question out there. You will get answers from that community, and I highly recommend it.
The other thing is that never underestimate the power of reskinning.
Correct.
This is basically the entire concept that my Elder Scrolls game runs on.
Right.
It's just D&D. We're literally just playing D&D straight out of the book. Yep. I wrote almost no homebrew rules for it whatsoever, other than people's astrological signs having a minor effect on them, giving them skill proficiency. Other than that, all the races are direct translations out of the books. I didn't use Dark Elf as Dark Elf. I used Tiefling because it fit a little bit better. But yeah, they're all just reskinned races. Like Find Familiar, it says, oh, you pull a small fairy creature from the Feywild. Well, the Feywild doesn't exist, so now it's a Daedra. That's it. It's just reskinned stuff. Yep. You guys were fighting Dark Seducers and Golden Saints, which are Daedra from the Elder Scrolls setting. They were Murgoths or something like that. There's some sort of demon were the Golden Saints, and Succubi were the Dark Seducers.
Yeah, yep.
Didn't change single thing about their stats. Literally, they were the closest monsters I could find, and I went right with them. Didn't homebrew anything. So, Vicky's character wields a katana.
Yeah. There's
no katana in the player's handbook. But you know what a katana is? It's a slightly curvy longsword.
Yep.
So you know what? It's a longsword now, It's all these things is mostly about finding abstract equivalencies and then just going with them. Because, frankly, anything you're probably going to stat out, there's probably already something out there that's either very close or exactly what you're looking for. And it saves you so much work just to change the name on something and run with it.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Grab another one.
Yeah. All right, so Overwatch asks, can you give an example of a bad fit combination of a setting and system? A combination that doesn't work, and why?
I like the 7th Sea system as a whole. It is basically a D10 system with magic, but the magic isn't as direct. It is simplified because each one of your casters is basically down a specific route, and there's some stuff there. I can't see using the 7th Sea system functionally in other settings. Parts of it, yes, I'd have to kit bash the heck out of it. But if I was going to try and take 7th Sea and use it in, say, Discworld, I don't think it would work.
I don't think it would either. I mean, the system is so tied into the setting.
It is, and I think that's part of the problem is how close it is to the system.
Yeah.
I think another one that makes that challenge is Rifts. Rifts as a whole is tied to its setting. If you tried to pull it apart, I think you'd run a lot of risk. There's some great elements to it, definitely.
Yeah.
Palladium as a whole is a very universal system.
Yeah, you could rip bits out of it and make something, but you could not port Rifts over to a different system.
So I think those kind of things would be bad. On the other hand, look what Palladium did as a whole for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think it was a working effort there, but I think, and this is just my personal opinion, it pulled away from what the property was. As far as kids recognized.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I was a kid, I didn't start by reading the Turtles comics. I didn't. I started by watching the show, which was this hokey show about a bunch of heroic turtles who went and kicked some very funny-looking guys' butts constantly.
And snarked down pizza every single chance they got because it was like crack to them.
Had this woman following them around, and some dude who kept a hockey stick around and wore a mask all the time and was kind of a doofus. Mm-hmm. This was the kind of setting that I saw, which was very heroic in setting. And then you play the TMNT game, and it is not. It is tactical and gritty by numbers.
It's gritty by numbers, yeah.
And so in that sense, for me, it was a crashing reality of, ugh.
Yeah.
But once I started playing it, I shifted mind frames. Mm-hmm. And I was able to play the game that was set before me, which was much closer to the comic.
Yeah.
The comic, I will say it that way.
Not the Archie comics.
Correct.
The Eastman and Laird
Correct.
Turtles comics.
The classic comics that were made for the reason they were made. We won't even get into that tonight. So, yes, everyone, we brought up Turtles. Jeez.
It's been a while since we had a turtle reference.
Yeah, we did that. We did that, so
we're back on track with that. Good.
Yeah, congratulations, Turtles have come back around. So yeah, that's what I would say would be a bad combination for me.
Yeah, I think my go-to is like D&D and anything that is not adventuring fantasy.
Yeah.
Because I think that probably the biggest, because D&D is so ubiquitous, that actually works against it.
Yeah.
And it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to have this discussion tonight in the first place. Is because I think a lot of people out there, the very first thing they reach for when they're like, I want to play in this other setting, how do I change D&D to work that way? And honestly, that should not be the first thing you reach for. D&D is a great setting for telling dungeon delving, day-to-day adventuring, high combat encounter fantasy stories.
Yeah.
And it sucks at everything else.
Yep.
It is amazing for what it does, but it sucks at everything else. If I want to play a social game in any way, no.
Or a skill-based game, really.
Yeah, exactly.
The other one that hit my head was, I don't know if anybody on here has actually played the Farscape game.
I have not.
I've heard it's terrible.
Oh, yeah.
It's a terrible adaptation. A lot of detail.
Uh-huh.
But again, that's a very defined world. Mm-hmm. And I just don't think it works. The other one was the, what am I? I'm losing it. Nope, it's gone.
I was actually mentioning to Sean before I came over here that I own the old Aliens role-playing game.
Oh, wow, I remember that.
God, I don't even remember.
I never played it, but I remember it, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that happened back in the early 80s.
Yeah, just these little one-off games and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I remember looking through the book. I could not tell you what the rules are like, so don't quote me on any of this. But I remember reading through the book and going, wow, this is just needlessly complicated. And I want you to understand, this was in the heyday of me playing Palladium.
Which is needlessly complicated.
I thought Palladium was a good system, and I looked at this and went, this is needlessly complicated.
Yeah. No, I feel that. There was a lot of games that came out at that time period that were like that. And there's been some that have come out since that definitely have that feel. Yeah. Firefly was the other one that I started flipping through. And literally I grabbed the book off a shelf, was like, oh, it's a Firefly game. And I started flipping through and I'm like, it's literally a mirror of the Firefly TV show. Mm-hmm. This is terrible.
Here's how you play Mal Reynolds.
You get to play the captain.
Yeah.
Mal Reynolds, but different. That's not Mal. Wait, what? Why would I want to create a fanfic with my friends?
Yeah.
There's
some people are into that.
Yeah,
but...
and I'll take a step back. I apologize to those who like role-playing fanfics. Mm-hmm. That is a thing. It is not something that I do for my role-playing side.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so the Mad Elf asks,
yes.
Do you have a favorite/preferred setting you'd like to see adapted, which has not been done yet?
That has not been done yet.
Technically, there's no official Elder Scrolls setting, so here I am.
That's true.
But you can say I've done it, so...
I would like to see, and this sounds really weird to say this, but I'd kind of like to see someone try and do a Hunt for Red October game. Like a classic Cold War submarine combat.
Oh.
Small team, again.
Oh, interesting.
You know?
Yeah. Huh.
I mean, it's basically naval combat. Again, but could you imagine like a Cold War game like that?
Back in the day, man, and we're talking Palladium days.
Yeah.
Okay. When I had ninjas and super spies at my
Sure.
fingertips, I actually thought about running a game that took place in an alternate universe where the Cold War never ended and Mother Russia was still our.
Dude, there was a lot
enemy.
of that was going on. Anybody here? I'm just going to throw this out there. I never played it. I only saw the books a couple times, but it came back up in my feed because apparently there's been an anniversary. Twilight 2000 was a game that was kind of thrown around, and apparently it's made multiple versions, been back around the block a few times. So, thank you, Hulavu. I appreciate that. Yeah, I have a love for Hunt for Red October, and it kind of popped into my head. I'm like, that would be a fun thing to try and do. Mm-hmm. And again, that comes back to Tom Clancy. Funny enough. Yeah. So that's the thing. Let's grab one more, just so we can kind of squeeze it out here and have
we got a little time.
We got a little bit of time.
I don't think I've answered the question.
Oh,
yet.
I'm sorry. I thought you jumped into that.
No. I mean, let's see. So we talked about The Division. We talked about that hasn't been done yet. Because I was going to say Aliens would actually be a good one, but as we just explained, it actually has been done.
Starship Troopers?
Badly. No, I mean, I wouldn't want to play in Starship Troopers. That's the thing. I think playing in Starship Troopers would like it was. The story was very heavily like anti-fascist, sort of themes and such like that. And I think playing it would go entirely against the idea. Like, enjoying the setting. You're not supposed to enjoy the setting. You're supposed to take it as a warning,
Right.
So I feel like enjoying the setting and exploring it further from the aspect of you're heroic in that setting would just be missing the entire point. Oh gods. I've mentioned this author before. A mutual friend of ours turned us onto her, Shauna McGuire.
Yes.
Now she has written several series of books. One of them being the October Day series, which is a contemporary fantasy story series, kind of akin to the Dresden Files.
Yeah.
And I've often said that I find that one very intriguing because it's all about fairies. And of course, the good and the bad of the whole fairy court and such like that, and how it intersects with our world.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually going to go with one of her other series right now, and that is the Wayward Children series. And it involves young children who wander off through doorways into strange worlds.
Ooh.
That they find these doors because they are meant to find these doors.
Okay.
These are their doors.
Interesting.
But when they go to these other worlds, they are changed by these worlds.
Okay, no, that makes sense.
And some people live out their lives happily or unhappily, otherwise, in these other worlds. Oh. But some children come back
different,
and because they've come back from these fantastical places, they're forever changed by their experiences. And the whole story the whole setting deals with this home for wayward children.
Ooh.
Which is essentially like a boarding school.
Okay.
To the outward-facing world, it's if your child is a weirdo who misbehaves and just can't get their reality back together, don't worry, we'll take care of them. What it really is it's run by someone who's had her own doorway.
Oh.
And tries to help the children find their way back.
Oh.
Because it's the only way they'll ever be happy and exist ever again. They can't exist in our world.
Interesting.
So at least they can be amongst others who understand their plight.
Right.
And maybe, just maybe, we'll figure out how these doors work, and we can put you back where you belong.
I like that. I think that would be a neat mystery, because you could do that serialized.
Yeah.
Where you're part of that team, like the Umbrella Academy type thing.
Yes.
Where you're finding these kids in their situations that suck in the real contemporary world, and then pulling them through. It's almost a little bit like a Miss Peregrine's.
Yeah.
In a direction.
A bit, yeah.
But I like I was unaware of this, but I like the Fey aspects of that. The being Fey touched changes you, because there's a lot that exists out there. That's cool. I like that.
It's not even just being Fey touched, though. Like,
right.
The first story surrounds someone who existed as a statue in the court of Hades and Persephone.
Oh, Lord.
And it was this place of death and stillness. And she loved it because the world was always too much for her. And there it was so quiet. And she could just be still. She could just be a statue. And she was one of Hades' favorite statues.
Would come and look at it and care for it.
In fact, at one point, and everything was colorless. Everything was black and white there. And so her senses weren't constantly being bombarded by noise and color. It was just still, and it was just black, and it was just white. And she had 5 streaks of white in her hair from where Hades, at one point, had admired her so much that he ran his fingers through her hair.
Oh, wow.
And, yep. And that was her. And then when she came back, like, everything was way too much because she existed in this world, And it wasn't fairies. It was gods of death.
That's amazing.
Of the underworld.
That's amazing. I like that. I like that.
So.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah. It goes all sorts of different directions. And
nice.
it's just fascinating.
Okay.
Last question.
Nox, right?
Yes.
Okay. If characters in the movie or book that you're trying to represent had a specific goal, motivation, or personality in that respective story, would you pick a game that mirrors those same qualities or something more open for players with different ideas for those worlds? I wouldn't be picking characters in the movie or book. Yeah. I would move hard away from that.
Well, I think what he's asking though is kind of the crux of our show is do you pick a game system that represents the themes of the IP? Mm-hmm. The specific goals, motivations, and such as that. AKA, like if we're doing Lord of the Rings, would our characters have the goal of defeating Sauron?
See, I don't
fighting against the dark in whatever way they might. Obviously they may not ever cross paths with the ring bearer or anything like that, but would they be forces fighting against Sauron?
I don't know, because see, I might do Lord of the Rings, but I might be doing like the dwarves trying to make their own way back to Moria.
Yeah.
After years of being away, and like they believe their kings are gone, and they need to get back there because it's their place. Or different dwarves that have been trying to defend themselves from other attacks of the orcs and things like that.
Yeah.
I think I would step away. I have a hard time going in with the same kind of drive. On the other hand, if I'm doing like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., sure, I might make a same unit that's constantly fighting different things there.
Sure.
And the powers that be that have come through and kind of playing with that. But again, I run risks every time Coulson is in the space, or one of the other heroes could be involved in some way, because now there is motivation and drive that everyone knows about and rules.
You almost can't have Captain America show up, because then you're like, well, he's not going to kill Steve Rogers, so I know he's just an unkillable tank at this point,
Yep.
I think it's just kind of goes back to stay away from canon.
Or drive against the canon. I think Nox made a good point there.
Play as the orcs.
Yeah. I kind of think that's a neat idea all in itself. That's
a cool idea. Yeah. That's a cool idea. I think I would definitely stray more towards allow the players with different ideas to kind of go their own way. Because I think the whole reason you take an existing IP like this and you drag it into the tabletop world is so that you can explore things that are outside of the box that was dictated by the original product.
Correct.
Correct.
You can go your own way.
As a Division agent, I would want to see what less looty, shooty, video gamey combat looks like, and more, what is the reality of day-to-day life in post-apocalyptic, post-green poison America?
Yeah.
How does survival work? How do you deal with rival gangs and such like that? Settlers and the good people who are just trying to make settlements for themselves.
Oh, we're over. That's it. Wow, we missed the ending.
Oh, wow, we rolled right through it. All right, well, next week we're going to be talking about Shadowrun as a game spotlight. Good luck with that.
Find us on Twitter at st_conclave, Instagram st_conclave, and obvious on MixLR at mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. You can also find our Discord link in our Twitter, or you can go to https://storytellerconclave.com now.
Yeah, storytellerconclave.com. We're a lot easier to find. Weird spelling of blueberry. The one thing, our Patreon members, as always, Knox in the Box, Sam, the Arcane Asylum, and every single one of you who contributes to us week after week. Thank you so much. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find us patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find them at geefrogmusic.weebly.com. And our outro music, which was playing over us this whole time, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Midair Machine. You can find her at freemusicarchive.org or soundcloud.com/midairmachine.
We'd like to thank our families and our friends who have been with us. You guys help us out so much and support us all the time. We thank you. And of course, our listeners. You make this all possible. Thank you so much.
We love every one of you.
Love you so much.
Good night.
Good night.